Ready. You tell us, Deepak.
Thank you.
No idea. Ready. Okay. Okay. All right. So this is the Curious Yogi podcast, leveled up here in our 700 rupee an hour studio in Rishikesh. So thank you so much, Stu, for coming back to chat with me. And last year when we had our conversation for the podcast, we were in the same place we are now, but a little bit different setting. So I'm wondering if we could start by bringing the listeners into where we are and why we're here.
We're in the old part of Rishikesh town. We're not in the ashram world, in the yoga world. We're in actually the real bit of India, in Rishikesh. But we're staying at Paramat Nikatan ashram. We've been doing a 8-day retreat in the ashram, 6 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon every day. And we're coming to the penultimate evening. And we've been attending Ganga Aarti, puja in the evening, and Havan, the fire ceremony, in the morning. And we've been living in the ashrama world for the last over 10 days, for me anyway.
Yeah, it's been like, this is my second time coming here into the retreat with you, and I think it's like, for myself and also watching the others that have come, like how unique or special of an experience it is for especially people, yoga practitioners coming from the West, to actually come here and experience this part of yoga.
Yeah. Well, it's unique, that's for sure. And a lot of people come here to do yoga. They come here to do yoga teacher trainings. They come here to experience yoga. But a lot of them don't actually stay for a prolonged period of time. And I think if you come here regularly and you keep coming back and you keep familiarizing yourself with the place and the people and the ambience, it becomes much more interesting spiritually, socially, and culturally, definitely. A lot of people just come to Rishikesh to say they've been to Rishikesh, the same way they go to Goa to say they've been to Goa, or they've been to Kerala, or they've been to Calcutta or Tamil Nadu, and they're just, I think that idea of being a tourist definitely is not a good thing to do in India. You're better just coming back to the same place and experiencing the same people and familiarising yourself with their sangh, with their family, and they do say it's like coming home eventually. And you can understand that when you keep coming back a few times. Like, you actually feel you're acclimatized, you're accustomed, you know faces, they know your face, and that's the great beauty of it, as opposed to coming once for a retreat, or a lot of people come to me with their training qualifications and it's a 200-hour certificate from Rishikesh, and they usually go to the bottom of the pile, and I'm not really interested, because I know that people have just come for a Rishikesh teacher training, and that's their whole experience of yoga, maybe before or after as well. So it's good to come back, and the people who have habituated themselves to coming here, like yourself, and stay in India in one place at the same time. I think that's the way to do it, really.
Yeah, I also definitely feel that way, and I think, like, why I do this podcast and why I also appreciate and love India and studying yoga in India is to get to the essence, to the real heart and soul, like that sense of coming home through the practices of yoga. Not only yogasana, but all the facets of yoga. And like, that's really what I want to talk to you about today, is like getting to that, the real heart of it, because we can get, as Westerners and maybe even as Indians, like really distracted from the fluff that's there in the West and also here.
Well, I suppose I could be quite controversial about this, because if you look at India from abroad now, and you look at politically, and you look at theosophically and philosophically, and the religious aspects to it, and the what's commonly known as Hindu nationalism at the moment. It's quite interesting because I too like to experience something a bit more authentic and a bit more real than yoga studios in London, and I advise other people to experience that as well. But a lot of people are of the opinion now that the yoga in India is tainted by this nationalism, by this right-wing dogma, this, if there is such a thing, Hindu fundamentalism. But I find that quite interesting, and that's what I study, and that's my studies. My studies at the moment are largely looking into the roots of Hinduism and what Hinduism actually means. And when you say yoga, I think you could largely, everybody says, the modern academics say, yeah, but yoga comes from Jainism, it comes from Buddhism, it's not just solely the property of Hindus. But when you go to a yoga studio in London, or you go to a yoga studio in Sweden or New York, there's a Ganesha, there's a Shiva, there's a Krishna, there's a Parvati, maybe the Buddha, but the Buddha's also a Hindu avatar as well. But not many Jains. You don't see any Jain. You don't see an image of Mahavira or some image of the Jain imaging. So I sort of consider, and this is quite controversial, that yoga has a largely Hindu element to it. And as much as the academics want to argue about the nitty-gritty of where it actually comes from, through time, it's related to Hinduism. So I like to come to India and look to the roots of yoga by looking as well at the roots of Hinduism and what the Hindu religion was before we termed and used the phrase Hindu, and how yoga was before this country was colonised in the 6th century by the Muslims and then by the British, and see what was actually there before, and not in an academic way, in an experiential way of how the people in the street, how the people in the temples, and how the people in the yogashala and everywhere in India get that. That's where I get a sense of authentic yoga from. That might be I might be completely deluded, and I'm sure lots of academics will argue otherwise, but that's something that really interests me, the way you go back to see where it comes from and to get the feel of yoga again and get the feel of India. And I think to do that, you've got to get the feel of Hinduism. You have to go and do arti and yagna. You have to go and do puja and experience temple life and ashram life, and understand the caste system and understand Sanatana Dharma and understand the ancient aspects of India, which are now becoming more repackaged and resold by Hindu nationalists, or what they call Hindu nationalists. They're not really Hindu nationalists. They're Hindutvists. They're Sanatanis.
Mm-hmm.
That's what interests me.
Yeah, that is interesting. And I know this week at the retreat, you've been speaking a bit about the Sanatana Dharma. Can you expand on that a little bit, or shed some light into what that is in practice?
Basically, what you call Hinduism.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically what you relate to as Hinduism, study of the Vedas, a Vedic way of life. Which, as I say, a lot of Western academics say, how can a Westerner study a Vedic way of life, and how can even modern Indians study a Vedic way of life? To me, Sanatan Dharma is the eternal truth, and the eternal truth they'll take from the texts, they'll take from the Vedas, the Puranas, the Dhamma-shastras, the Aryankas, and they're all part and package of yoga in their own way, and this eternal Dharma that they talk about it's Dharma, it's the eternal truth. But the critics, and there's many of them in Western academia, say that it's very dogmatic, it's very Islamophobic, it's very anti-Christian, it's very anti-Western, with Swadesh and the whole idea of the Indian monoculture and mono-society, and the aim is a Hindu Rashtra, which doesn't really fit in with what other Hindus think. It's a very small minority.
Mm-hmm.
They just happen to be in power. But there's a lovely book about it, Why I Am a Hindu by Shashi Tharoor, which is a lovely book to read, and it will explain to you what it represents as the Sanatana Dharma that the people who are actually promoting a really fundamental form of Hinduism aren't the majority. It's a very small, noisy and vociferous minority. They're very powerful in the moment in India, religiously, socially, economically. But they also have a huge effect on yoga, and that's where the yoga commentators are taking a huge offence in the West, because they see Modi using yoga as a soft power to promote Hindutva, to promote Sanatana Dharma, this reawakened religion, which we actually, the 17th century, we actually decided to call it Hinduism, and it was we packaged it as it was, and we made the Brahmins. It was a lot to do with the British Empire. We completely altered the caste system. It was the British that altered the way the caste system worked, so they could manage to deal with a certain caste of people who happened to be Brahmins. So from the 1600s onwards, 1700s onwards, that whole idea that became Hinduism was largely due to the West, to the Raj, probably due to the East India Company, to be honest, and due to the British government and British missionaries and Christian missionaries. And
seems like everywhere the British just fucked it up. Like.
Oh, they did. There's a couple of lovely books on it, Empire Land and Empire World.
Yeah.
The newest one's just been released. His name's Sutta. It's a really it's one of these books you'll see Times bestseller. So Empire Land and Empire World, and they're well worth reading. And Shashi Tharoor has a glorious empire of how the British actually colonised and the detrimental effect, which is met with a lot of antagonism at Oxford University when he gave it as a lecture quite a long time ago now. But that's the main text in that book, which is Glorious Empire. And what the Sanatanis and what the RSS, the paramilitary branch of BJP, the ruling party, will say, which is very, very influential in the world of yoga, because Modi was a RSS youth, and he was brought up through the RSS and brought up before the BJP. There's a thing called the Sangh Parivar, and the Sangh Parivar are a whole family of organisations, from trade unions, women's groups, education, theosophical groups, but the main ones are an overseas one, VHP, and the paramilitary one here is RSS, with about 12 million members, and then there's a youth movement, and they're very influential as to how yoga is getting perceived in the outside world, because they're using it as a soft power. They're using it as a power to say, look at India, it's peaceful, it's fun-loving, it's fun-loving as well, but it's peaceful, it's spiritual, it's got this element of deep spiritual beliefs and practices, but at the same time there's things that aren't so peace-loving and spiritual about it on the ground, so to speak. And that's when it becomes controversial.
Yeah, and then it's like, okay, that when you're speaking, it's very clear, like, those are very contradictive sort of phenomenons that are unfolding, like the way that yoga is perceived in this like resurgence in India. But like, how do we as yoga practitioners kind of reconcile these two dichotomies of like,
I'm trying to work that out,
and like when we practice yoga in the studio or actually anywhere, it's so much like it is non-secular, it is for everybody. Like, I love in your practice how you always say, like, you devote your practice to a God of your understanding. It could be Jesus, it could be Allah, it could be, and that resonates for me anyways. And yet there's this whole other facet that where the way yoga has been in the West for the last however many years, we're not seeing what's happening in India. How do we bring it together or respect both, while taking these Vedic teachings, which actually they are for everybody because they're universal.
Right, yeah. Well, there's quite a lot there, but there's two things. There's two things. One is when you are in the West and you're teaching, and people will come to, I dread to think how many people and what percentage of it is, but I think a sort of large percentage of people will come to yoga classes in the West and say, sod all that shit, I don't want to listen to that crap, I just want to do exercises. And that unfortunately is becoming more and more and more. Like people don't want to go to a studio where they have to chant and they do meditation and they do pranayama and they do mantra. They don't want to do that. They just want to do the asana. They want to do a handstand. They want to do twists. They want to do bends. They want to get their body in the. They want to get their bum tight. They want to get their belly tight. So the first thing where there is a huge dysfunction is that idea in the West that yoga is this. Yoga is keep fit. Yoga is wellness. Yoga has been commodified and it's been monetized so much in the last 25, 30 years. It's become this $1 trillion business, and the same as mindfulness and the same as other Eastern practices, Buddhist practices, Hindu practices. They've been monetized and commodified beyond recognition. And people will not really be interested in what you and I may think of as real yoga. They may think it's for the weird and wonderful, the people who wear mala, the people who chant mantra every morning, the people who have a little shrine at home and light their candle and pray and do meditation. They're not really interested in that. I'd say more and more people are becoming like that. And that's the first thing, before you even get to the dichotomy between modern Hinduism, what Hinduism really is, and its secularity within the Indian state, which is a secular state, supposedly. If Hindu Rashtra has its way, it won't be a secular state, it'll be a Hindu state. But you have all these basic capitalization, like the capitalization, the way it's been made into a capitalist enterprise in the West is one thing that absolutely fuels Hindu nationalism here. They're like, you've taken 1/6 of our whole darshan, 1/6 of our whole Indian philosophy, and you've made it into a business, and you culturally appropriate everything. Everything we have, you've taken from us and monetized it. And Indians monetize it as well, we know that, but like in the West generally, I do it, everybody does it. I do it, I'm totally cynical about it. I run yoga classes, chakra classes, I do philosophy classes, and I make money out of it, I make a living out of it, and I commodify it. But I try to give something back. I don't just blatantly steal. It's like there's a really good classification of types of cultural appropriation you can have, and I'm probably not there at the higher echelon yet, but once I've got a grasp of maybe a bit more culturally aware with the Hindu language and Hindu culture and the Sanskriti and the traditions of yoga even more than I have now, I'm probably somewhere in the upper middle tier, but I'm not down at the bottom, which is totally cultural appropriation, the same way mindfulness meditation in the military or within corporations is exploitation of Buddhist mindfulness and the cultural appropriation of it. I think there's a huge scope of change that's going to come about, because people will realize that keep fit, yoga as a keep fit exercise will become yoga like karate, or yoga like step exercises, or yoga like parkour, or yoga like cycles, whatever they call, the bike ones. And it won't last forever. They don't. If you're not interested in going on a little bit further with yoga, you'll just go and do something else. But the people who are interested in it more, they'll start to chant, and they'll start to wonder about what books to read, and they'll start to want to go to India. And when they do come to India, they'll start to realize what Shashir Tharoor talks about is that you can come and you can be part of our Hindu Sangh, our Hindu family, but you can still be a Muslim, you can still be a Christian, you can still be a socialist, you can still be an atheist. You don't have to give up your religion to come to the yoga family. The yoga family is universal, nobody's excluded. And that's something really important that maybe modern Hindu nationalists need to learn from the traditional Hindus who are all accepting of everyone. I used to know when I started reading about yoga and Hindu philosophy, a lot of the gurus, they would go and study Islam. They would study Christianity, they studied Judaism. So they would welcome everybody, but they seen that as just as part of just part of Hinduism. It's just part of their religion. Because it's not a religion. It's not a religion, it's just one thing. There's not one church, there's not one book, there's not one leader, there's not the Pope, there's not the Bible, there's not there's not the Muhammad, there's not one icon. It's millions and millions and millions of individual little micro cults of different religions, and that's what's fascinating about it. That's what's really fascinating. One of the things, like the other 5 branches of Indian philosophy, one of the things they have in common is yoga. A lot of them relate to yoga, and that's when it becomes interesting, when you come to study it and you realise, you go to Tamil Nadu, you see people practicing yoga. You go to here, or you go to Maharashtra, or you go to Gujarat, and you see people practicing. It's not all the same as it is in Mysore. You know what I mean? It's not all the same as it is in Pune. It's different, because there's 1.3 billion people, and it's a huge country with many states, and that's when it becomes totally diverse and fantastic, and this vast array of different teachings and different attitudes towards how to achieve this state. And that's what I think you can come and get. And it doesn't matter about your religion or your sexuality or your gender or your political beliefs. It's not to do with that. That's when it becomes something that's a bit more eternal. That becomes when a real truth can shine through, and that's what I think will be the saviour of modern yoga. I don't think it will be completely excluding all the deities from the yoga studios and just having these super clean, like Japanese fabricated, clean, nice edges, and totally what's the word? When you decorate a building, it's got when the Japanese have a way of laying out their buildings, and
feng shui.
Every studio will have this feng shui to itself, yeah. Which will be devoid of. It will never be devoid of Ganesha. There'll always be an Om somewhere, and people like my kids always say, "What's the Om for?" My daughter thought Om was the flag of India. Brady, she thought, "Oh, that's India, isn't it?" When she used to see an Om, and she said, "Oh, it's India." And like they'll never take the Om away from the yoga studio. So people always question. Never take Ganesha out of the yoga studio. They'll never take Shiva, because you say it when you do a posture. You say Garuda. You say Shiva. You say Natarajasa, and you'll always have that relation, or you have some teachers to it. So I know that's a pretty going off at a tangent question, but the two things were the commodification and that one aspect of it, and then the relationship with how atheists and people with different religions, they're all accepted within Hinduism as I know it, and not within what the modern aspect of the people who want Hindu Rashtra and who want a Hindu nation, free from Islam, free from... If you ever have a meeting, if you ever go into an academic meeting, it's really hard to get people to have the last word. They don't accept just what you say and move on. They say, yeah, but, and then they'll come up with their little thesis. And that's what theses are about. They're arguments with somebody else's thesis. So the whole master's degree was learning about other people's opinions and regurgitating them, and not being allowed to be inventive, because you never had any evidence for it. So
but it's kind of interesting, because yoga is an experiential practice, as is that's why we come to India, because we get the essence in the experience. Like you say in meditation, you can't teach meditation, you experience meditation. So it's kind of ironic to have ones that study and nitpick to the source on the text and this and that, when actually you're kind of missing the point then.
And there's a really good philosopher from Canada called Shyam Ranganathan, Dr. Shyam Ranganathan. He owns yoga philosophy. He's a professor of philosophy in Canada, and I've talked to him just once after an online lecture, but I follow him, and he says in one of it, I did his first lecture, and he said in one lecture, I remember it really well, he says, philologists aren't philosophers, and the only people you can trust with language are people who are indigenous to that language. So he wasn't happy with the philology that he had experienced, so he went and learned Sanskrit himself and translated his own version of Sanskrit, of sutras, for example, and other stuff, because he didn't trust the philologists who were in the West or in the global North, whatever you want to call it, because him being East Asian, being Sri Lankan, he's got that connection. He's brown for a start, you know, and he had the problem with philologists in the West being philosophers and philosophizing because of the translation of certain words. And I found that quite appropriate, because if I wanted to learn about the a certain part of the Ganga and a village within the Ganga, I'd go and live in that village, and I'd learn to speak to the elders and find out about the history. I wouldn't read about it in a library and pass papers in academia and do my ethnographic research there. I would do it in the village, and I would stay in the village. And some philologists do that, but ultimately you can't philosophize because you'll never understand the indigenous philosophy. I don't think you can. That's my opinion anyway. I'm not a philologist, and I don't aspire to be a philologist. Most of my studies are sort of crossover politics, philosophy, history, anthropology, and try to be a bit more transdisciplinary, as opposed just to be a philologist or a historian or a theosophist. And I think that's important now. I think more people need to look at a whole broader picture. And a practitioner, that's another thing. There's a lovely woman that I read, lovely, I've never met her, but I read all her sociology work, Shamina Black, and she practices. So she's a sociologist talking about politically and the sociological effects of yoga and the language, but she's a practitioner.
Mm-hmm.
And she's really interesting, and I like that aspect of it, where you can criticize and you can analyze and you can theosophize and you can philosophize from an indigenous point of view, from someone who's a participant and not an observer.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's important.
Yeah. And then I'm also thinking, like, when we're talking about, now we're having like a conversation about yoga and about the experience of yoga, the practices of yoga, and obviously it's very nuanced, but I'm wanting to kind of offer something, or like, as one of your students, I feel like, you're such an incredible teacher, and the way that you instruct the practices, the classes, is very approachable. Like, obviously, you have such a big group of students from all over the world that something that the way that you teach resonates, and something that you said the other day in class I wanted to talk a little bit more about, which was when we were in our meditation talking about the practice of neti neti, which is something that I've heard again and again, and I love that practice, and I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit or shed a little bit of light on neti neti, and what are we getting to when we practice the seat of yoga, which is the seat of meditation, and that practice of neti neti.
Neti neti always reminds me of gata gata paragati. But neti neti, when I was when I was going through a sort of crisis point in my life, I remember once, and relationships, started doing yoga, started to clear my head from, as everybody does at one point in their life, from teenage, middle-aged relationships, all sorts of disastrous, dysfunctional relationships, harmful for me but more harmful to others who were in relationships with me, and I didn't know really what I was. Very much totally absorbed myself with yoga at first, even though I was still taking drugs and I was still partying and I was still being a completely horrible people and nasty person to a lot of people. Even though I'd started doing yoga, I was still being nasty. And I thought I'll go and talk to someone about this, and I thought I'll go and get some therapy, because I had come across Jungian therapy when I was younger, and it didn't work. I just drank more and took more drugs and partied more and had a bit more fun, because I thought, well, that doesn't work for me. I'm not going to try Freudian therapy. I'm not going to try Jungian therapy. So I thought I'll go and try some form of counselling. And then I realised I'd tried like lots of spiritual counselling before. So I've been with yoga teachers. I've been on retreats. I've been in classes. I've been with different teachers and talked to them afterwards. And I studied texts. And I goes, but I do not want anything to do with, I used to be at, had started having a juice bar and going to mind, body, soul festivals, and it was very, lots of spiritual, different advice from tarot cards to, everything like that, from being at festivals and taking drugs and hanging out with the, in the alternative field, in the new age field. A lot of my friends were new age travellers, and I thought, well, I don't want that. I'm going to go to the straightest dynamic counsellor that I can find, and see what she says. Nothing spiritual at all. Nothing to do with festivals or new age or gong baths or acid or and nothing to do with that, or Gabriella Roth dancing or anything like that. Nothing. I'd done all that and it didn't really work. And I've been friends with a lot of Krishnas and nothing like that. Still took drugs, still drank, still smoked, still was a horrible person to most people. So I went to this counsellor and I told her, I just laid down, it was an hour, I went a few times, but just talked to her, and said, when I was 14, this is what I was like, and this is what I brought up, and this is, she was asking me how I was as a teenager, and then I was surrounded by like the 60s, and then the early 70s happened, and I rebelled against that, I became a punk, and then I was a mod, and then I was into reggae music, and then I became into electronic music, and that went on, and I went into dance and parties, and I explained all my sort of my fads and fashions to her, and she just turned around and said to me, she said, yeah, but that's not who you are, that's what you wear. And that was the first time it ever sunk in that wasn't me. That was the first time that it was me just putting on a costume because I saw it in a newspaper, or I saw it in a magazine, or I saw it on a TV program, or I saw it in a band, and I thought, I'm going to leave Bobby, she's a cool singer in that band, and they're like #1 in the indie charts, and I'm going to dress like him, and I'm going to act like him, and I'm going to, when I go out at nightclub, and when I go to discos, and when I go to bars, I'm just going to be like him, or I'm going to be like her. But it was a time of like new romantics, mods, a lot of cross-dressing, a lot of Boy George, a lot of boys dressing up as girls, a lot of homosexuality came out for the first time, in 77, 78, people came out and said, I'm glad to be gay, and a lot of people's sexuality changed. And I thought, well, that thing that I was up until that I sat and talked to that woman, it was the first time I realised that that's not who I am, that's what I was. And most people go through their life being what they are and not who they are. And that's the teaching that I found 26 years ago when I started reading about who am I and neti neti. Not who am I, because that's really hard. When I started reading Maharishi, and I started to say, who am I is really difficult, because that's the eternal truth. That's the divine, that's the self, the true self, whatever you want to call it. Some people call it the divine or Atman or God or whatever you want to call it. Richard Dawkins, the great atheist, he calls it, you can call it any Mickey Mouse, Disney character you want to call it. We'll just call it something, but okay.
The 12 steps also.
Yeah, you can call it anything, right?
Yeah.
In Zen, you can call it anything you want as well. So to get the answer to who am I is quite difficult. But if you keep asking what you're not, I'm not a husband, I'm not a father, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a brother, I'm not a sister, I'm not a music fan, I'm not a bibliophile, I'm not a vegan. All my labels. If you get rid of all them, guess what you're left with? Who you are.
Self.
That's neti neti. That's neti neti. That's the easiest way I can possibly explain it, because I'm pretty simple in many ways in my mind. I try and decomplicate things, things are far too complicated. Someone talked about this the other day. Complex things are really useless. Complex things are really, really useless. George Orwell and a lovely guy called Ivor Cutler, who was a famous Scottish poet, and George Orwell both did this thing about the campaign for plain English, because they realised if you wrote in plain English, 95% of the population would understand what you're writing. If you wrote in highbrow literature English, you've got the 5% plus a few more. So I always thought, that's right, because I don't understand big words, and I don't like big words. I don't like polysyllables, because it alienates 90% of the population, because they don't know polysyllables. So the way that I saw neti neti was just that simple. I'm not a punk, I'm not a mod, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a student, I'm not a IBM programmer, I'm not an IBM storeman, I'm not a waiter in Paris, I'm not a hitchhiker around South America. And if you get rid of what you're not, you suss out who you are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and that's how I got there, and that's how I think most people should get there.
Mm-hmm.
Just say, I think that's what he says. I think he says, the teacher says that. He says, work out first what you're not, and then what's left is you, is your true self, and that's Vedanta, that's self-realization, that's how to get there. Really Vedanta becomes very complicated. When you go towards the seer, the seen, and this, that becomes so complex. I've tried so many times to explain that to people, and I know they just look at me as if to say, what are you talking about? What do you mean the seer can't be seen, but the seer is the one who sees? Just becomes complicated for a lot of people, and me. So I thought, this is the easiest way to explain it. This is neti neti. Whatever you're left with is you. And it's the same when you meditate. Like, once you realise that you witness everything that comes into your head, thought after thought, jealousy, anger, anxiety, fear, paranoia, when you witness everything coming into your head, and you've been through them all and you let them run, it stops. And then the space in between those thoughts is you. And that's very similar and very simplistic in the same context of neti neti. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I guess is that we could also kind of say that's the practice of discernment or vivek, like observing, we can say observing the thoughts. That which is changing is the untruth. That what comes and goes, the identifications we have, the thoughts, the emotions, whatever arises, will inevitably, based on Prakriti, subside. And that which remains, like you said, or that which is left, then that is the unchanging truth.
That's
and
the eternal truth.
Right. Because it's only truth if it's unchanging.
Yeah.
And so in the world of the waking state, human, essentially everything is changing.
Yeah, and it's still, that truth's still going to be there when you're long gone.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't want to accept that because they're so stuck in this body. Like, they think, this is it. This is like, it's not a dress rehearsal, this is it, as Alan Watts says, this is it. That eternal truth. I sometimes say this, and I find that Shaz says it's quite morbid, my girlfriend says it's quite morbid to say it in class, but sometimes I say to him, in 120 years, none of you will be here. So doing a handstand's not that important, yeah, but discovering your eternal truth might be more important, you know, and actually to say to people, like, the first lesson in Buddhism that Tibetan Buddhists learned when they're 12, 13, is impermanence. Nothing's permanent. So, but Westerners, I keep saying, I got into trouble the other day by a woman, a Syrian woman, who said, stop using Western and Eastern. And I was like, well, what is it? Global North, Global South, erudite and non-erudite,
Yeah.
people that know and people that don't know, some of them in the East, some of them in the West, but they don't quite get that impermanence thing. They don't quite get that this is it. And that, one of the first books I ever read was This Is It by Alan Watts, and it was to me, it was like, right. In 100 years' time, and for me now it's probably going to be in 20 or 30 or 40 years' time, there's no me anymore in this body. So what is there? If I can realise that eternal truth is there, there's that self-realisation, and that will make things much easier. For me it does anyway, because I was one of those kids that woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning, upright in bed at 10 years old, going, I don't want to die, I don't want to die, that's the end, I don't want to die. And my mum would have to come up and calm me down and settle down again. And, you know, that went on till middle age.
Yeah.
And then something came along called yoga, and it actually made me a bit more accepting of that, because no one had ever taught me when I was 14 that I think how they do it in Buddhism, this might be a myth, this might be a story, but they take the boys out where they throw the dead bodies in Tibet and they let the vultures eat them. And then they say, well, that's what happens to your body. But look just beside it and you'll see a little bud of a plant that started to grow for the remains of that body. That's where your body starts to regrow, but yourself has gone somewhere else. And if it's reborn, it's reborn somewhere else, and then they'll find from that, they'll trace that lineage of one lama to the next lama, which I find really fascinating.
I do also. And like similarly, my teacher, he would say, you know, where you won't be here in 100 years, and where were you 75 years ago?
What was that, 3 weeks ago? But
Yeah.
people can't remember where you were 3 months ago, never mind the last life.
And yet we take this flesh and bone as the absolute truth. Like even when we were walking here across the bridge, we saw those gats, 2 burning bodies right there. Just like, it's so interesting here to see how life and death is perceived. Even the yogis so brilliant, Shavasana, Mritasana, corpse pose, death pose every day to explore that and face it. Because we have to kind of face it. I think we talked about this last year when we did a podcast about the fear of death.
As well.
Yeah.
It made me happier. That was my biggest source of trauma in my head, was those waking up nights.
Yeah.
Still when I was a wee boy, and maybe that's, you know, I had trauma in my life, but I had trauma, violence and sexual relationships and being nasty to people and being abusive towards people. So I had all that trauma in my head. But I think that one of the big traumas is like fear of death. I was like, fuck, I'm going to be dead soon. Give us another line of coke then. Come on, get some beers in. You know, and that fear of death when you're lying, how am I going to get you sleep tonight? Because I know I'm going to die. All right, can I have some more heroin, please? Can I have some more sedatives? You know what I mean? And I think that's why I doze like that as well, from that fear of death thing. Fear of violence as well. But I think you have many traumas in your life, but one of the main ones is that abhinivesha, that clinging to life. It's clinging to your body. That's where it doesn't really mean fear of death. The translators always translate it, the philologists always translate it as abhinivesha as fear of death. I don't think like many yogis have a fear of death, but some of them cling to life. And once you cling to the life thing, it doesn't mean, if you're scared of dying, it's not the same thing as clinging to life. You can cling to your life, but not be scared of dying. Yeah, I think I'll cling to life, but I'm not scared of dying. I wouldn't get up in the morning and do physical exercise and bother keeping my body fit and strong. If I wasn't clinging to life, then I would just do what a lot of Zen Buddhists used to do and a lot of sadhus used to do. They just abuse their body and then they die at 57. From Alan Watts died at 57. Lots of Zen monks died, drink and eat badly and don't care about their bodies. They don't care because they know the body is temporal. So like, I think I do cling to life, but less and less I'm having a fear of death. And I think Abhinivesha should be seen as the field and not avidya. And she talked about this. Sadhji talked about this the other day when she talked about kleshas. She said she's one of the few people who talk about it. Most commentators talk about ignorance, or it's not ignorance anyway, it's lack of knowing, it's unknowing. It's not being ignorant towards one another. The common usage of the word ignorant, which is a bad translation. So like the avidya is the field. I see it the other way about sometimes. Once you have a fear of death, then you have a problem with aversion and hatred. Then you have a problem with hatred and ego, and then that leads to not knowing. I see it back to front sometimes. I see it the other way as well, but it's worth seeing like those obstacles to self-realization, those kleshas which come up always in the Buddhist canon and always in the yoga canon and the Hindu canon as well. They're so important to overcome those 5 obstacles. And I think it's important to understand that bit of yoga philosophy, Hindu philosophy and Buddhist philosophy, because fear of death is so important. Fear of death is so important. Or getting over the fear of death.
Yeah.
Because the teaching in the Gita is just like, you just change your clothes, that's it. which for a lot of people is just, they can't understand that at
No.
all. You know, Westerners can't get that.
Yeah. I guess I have like a question. When we go through these practices, like we're sitting in, you know, the practice of meditation where we hopefully, ideally, arrive at that place where that ever-present animating life force is revealed to itself, even for a glimpse or a glimmer between the thoughts. And we have that experience, and it feels like to me, isn't then that rather than it being a fear of death, it's like the being that wants to know its own immortality, which shines through us all, and that kind of the fear or the discomfort or the divine disillusionment actually inspires us to go inward and look, which is why, you know, like you see so many people that are, say, addicts that are actually just deeply spiritual, seeking that free being inside that is eternal. But yet, like, that to kind of wrap the mind intellect around, it's the counterintuitive almost.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. Yeah, I think that whole state that you reach. I mean, I think when you do reach that state and you do reach that, and I think one thing that you mentioned, you had a glimpse of it. That's really important because it doesn't last for very long. It doesn't last for very long because you've got to go back to the girlfriend, the daughter, the shopping, the council tax. You've got to go back to the car insurance. You've got to go back to the shopping. Or you've got to go back to the online, the emails, and the how do we pay the mortgage and the electricity bill. So you do really one. Was sorry, I've lost my thread of thought there.
Sorry.
The first one was when you do come here and you see people practicing those aspects of yoga that we know are yoga. Unfortunately, the academic and the Western practitioner and the commodified people and the monetized people don't see that as yoga. They see it as appropriating Hinduism. They see that that's the first obstacle you come up against. So we're not allowed to do something. We're not allowed to grow jata, and we're not allowed to wear beads and light incense in our house because that's Indian and we're white. So that means Indians can't watch Disney TV and wear Levi jeans and wear Adidas and tracksuits. So, but it's cultural. Okay, does that mean they can't appropriate Jesus Christ in Hollywood? Our religion is money, so they can't appropriate our religion, which is money. Of course they do. So if it's talking about that level of appropriation again, you know, we can go to temple, we can sit down under a banyan tree with a swami every morning and pray. Why not? Why should we be not allowed just because we're white? Sorry, brown people only. Like go to Africa, black people only. It's not. You know, all African religions welcome everybody. All, you know, whether it's tribal or whatever. Aboriginal, all the Aboriginal religions around the world, whether it's in South America or anywhere, Scotland, Celtic religion, or the Celtic culture, they welcome most people. They don't say you can't come because you're white. So to suggest academically that we're culture appropriating by taking part in a puja, or by wearing beads, or having mala, or having a shrine in your house, is pretty fascist. Fascist, not fascist.
Fascist.
Yeah, that horrible word that I can't get right. And then the second thing was the whole thing about I teach yoga, and I have certain friends who come to my class all the time, and I become friends with them. I'm not their guru, I'm not their master. I don't have a guru-shishya relationship. It doesn't exist in London. Some people come to my class for 6 months, some people come for 6 years, and then they go to another studio because they moved to a different part of London and they go with a different teacher. And a lot of teachers get upset. They say, oh, Bobby came to my class for 2 years and now she's with Jeff. And, you know, I taught her everything she knew. If I was to do that with every single person I've taught, and where they are in London now, people I've taught as teacher trainees just walk by me in the street and don't even look at me. Do you know what I mean? And people, I go to other studios and people I've taught and come to class regularly 4 or 5 times a week for 6 years, just say like, hi, and walk by me. I don't have a guru-shishya relationship because they don't understand what it is anyway. In India, you can have a guru-shishya relationship. And I mentally, in my head, I have a guru relationship with 3 or 4 people in my life that I know took me out of darkness. And I know they took me out of darkness. And I'll never, ever, ever stop thanking them from that. And I'll never, ever forget that. But what I try to be for people is a spiritual friend. I'm just like, you know, I'm there. I'll be there more or less 4 or 5 times a week. You can come and see me. You can do what I want. It'll keep you fit. You'll live longer. You'll breathe better. And you might even get in touch with your true self. Some people have done that and come religiously all the time for 16, 17 years, and they're quite happy, and they're my friends. They're my friends. I'll phone them up, I'll send them a text message, I'll talk to them, we'll share books, we'll go and we'll talk when we meet each other. When I've not got a stupid schedule and they've not got a stupid schedule, we spend time. But I don't see it as a guru-shishya relationship where I get upset when you've gone to a different branch or a different cult of my religion, but some people do. Some people still think that faith should still be there. And like, if I get upset sometimes when people don't understand what I've been saying. Like, you know, good example. Study with me, do my teacher training, stay with me 3 years. Go regularly 4 or 5 times a week, practice at or 3 or 4 times a week, practice at home and yourself the other time, listen to me and listen to what I'm talking about, and then go and do a Bikram training in Spain. Have you listened to what I've said about Bikram and said what I've said about him as a person and what it stands for and what his practice is and how it's totally stolen from his teacher and repackaged and reorganised to make him a lot of money very quickly with a horrible personality who's a sex criminal and who's wanted in 7 states in America for rape. And you go and do a teacher training with him after coming to my class and listening to me. That upsets me. That sort of grinds and irritates me. Things like that. But I don't go, oh, she's not coming to my class anymore. Oh, he's going with him now. Oh, she's going in retreat with so and so and not me. If I got worried about everything that happened, I wouldn't teach anymore. Do you know what I mean? It's just like, and still people do. You know, still people get possessive about their students. I don't call them students. I just call them people. They're just people. Students go to university. Students go to university and do undergraduate and postgraduate and PhD. I'm a student, so that guru shishya thing, I think largely, if you want a guru, the guru finds you.
Nice.
That's how it works.
Yeah.
If you go to India, don't look for a guru. I met so many Americans when I first came here. Hey dude, what are you doing? Oh well man, I came to look for my Sadhguru. And I thought, you'll probably find them in Wyoming or something like that, or Colorado. You should have stayed in America. I'm like, what? And just walk away from me as if I'm being rude. And I was like, that's what I got taught. Like,
Yeah.
and the people that I found me. I didn't go out looking for people. I just sort of, I looked at, from my first Ashtanga guru, my first teacher in Ashtanga, I looked through the door. I'd been for therapy in a hospital, and I looked through a door window and I thought, that looks interesting, I want to try that. And like, he looked at me and said, come in, and I signed up and I started going in, and it was totally useless, but you know, it wasn't as if I went looking to sign up for something thinking, I'm going to be enlightened, I'm going to, you know, I'll buy my mala and I'll get my books and I'll study. And I just thought, this is quite interesting, you know, it's like physically quite pleasing, and forget all the religious stuff and forget all the Hindu stuff and forget all the real yoga stuff. It's just quite interesting at first, so it found me. And I still, they say that in the text,
Yeah.
your guru finds you. Your guru will find you somehow.
And in the meantime, it's good to remember, you know, it's an independent work, but we can't do it on our own, which is why we have these friends and the teachers.
Yeah, that's why you have friends, yeah. And I
we
learn from you. You know, if I don't know something that I know you're a specialist at, I'll text you and say, by the way, how do you do this? Do you know what I mean? I don't know that much about a lot of things. So like, if I'm working and trying to help, and I'm in save it to other people, they don't save it to me as well. I get kickback from it.
Yeah, that seems like that's the reciprocity
That's how it
of
should be.
yoga.
Yeah, that's
you
how
know?
it should be, isn't it?
And that's beautiful.
Yeah, because I'll say to someone, I haven't got a clue about that. Do you know about that? And I know they do. Do you know? I say, could you help me with that? And like, and I know how to get your foot behind your neck. That might help you.
I definitely need help with
that might
that.
make
So.
you happier. You know, if
Yeah.
that makes you happy, I'll help you
Yeah.
do that. But I can also tell you how to sit still for a while, and I can tell you how to breathe, and I can tell you how things that might help your life and keep you alive a bit longer, if that's what you want to be. But usually it was, for me, it's quite advantageous for me, because I really appreciate it. I can say to people, by the way, you're could you help me? And that feedback, that exchange is really important. That's Muladhara chakra. That I never realised that till recently. That Muladhara is all about getting, not just that finding a rootedness and an earthiness and having strength for everything, and you know, understanding your genealogy and understanding this. It's actually being a socialist, and people don't like you saying that. It's about being a communitarianist. It's about being able to live in social cohesive groups. Muladhara. When you're grounded in Muladhara, when you're not grounded in Muladhara, you don't have social support. I was lecturing on this the other day, and I realised, Muladhara is all about social interaction, and people who are got a disharmony in Muladhara, when they don't have the rootedness, they don't have the earth, they don't have the groundedness, it's because they don't have a integrated social structure. They're dysfunctional. They're alienated from society. Whereas people who are part of a larger community or of a family, they're more grounded. They're more grounded. And they used to call that in the old days, that was called socialism. Socialism. It's got a bit of a bad name, but I'd say I was a democratic socialist, and I'd probably be a libertarian anarchist at the same time. I did think I was a spiritual anarchist for a while, and I do still talk on spiritual anarchism. Definitely. But, I think being a socialist is really important, to be grounded in the community and not to be a free market economy liberal or a capitalist, because then you'll never be rooted in the ground. You'll never have that grounding, that earthing within a community. You'll always be isolated, because all you think about is profit and self and greed and ego. And I think that's really related to Muladhara.
And that's also, I guess, where the aspect, the spiritual practice of seva is rooted in that socialist way as well.
Seems to have been a bad word recently, socialist. I think socialism's important. Socialism's important. Okay, don't call it socialism, call it communitarianism.
Nice.
Yeah, call it communitarianism. Call it just being part of the community. Whether it's in Saskatchewan in the farm, or whether it's in Scotland in the Highlands, or whether it's in central London, have a community. It's good. Have a few people you can phone up that you teach yoga or do yoga with, or go see movies with, or go for a dosa with, or talk to. And you've got a community. You're not sitting in the farm on your own in Canada. You're not sitting in Scotland in your house thinking, I'll just have another whiskey and watch the TV. And you're not sitting in London thinking, there's millions of people here but I don't know anybody. If you've got that community and you've got some political, social and economic security, you'll be grounded, ready for yoga, ready to find the harmony in Muladhara chakra. And I think people see chakras as all hippie and airy-fairy. I don't. I see them as sort of integral and practical and functionable. I don't see them as, oh man, you've got to bring your chakras into line and keep them harmonised. I think they're dead easy to work with. I used to never even believe, I thought they were for hippies. I never realised after using them for so long that all you have to do is chant Lam, Bam, Ram, Yam, Ham, Om, chant it to yourself quietly, and you get a harmony, and that helps you do many, many different things that relate to each of those centres. Probably academics would disagree, but experientially it works. I know it works because I use it.
Yeah. And on that note, I feel like we could go forever, because I will have to chakraize my asanas in 2 hours in our practice.
Yeah, you need to get ready for. It's all right. It won't be such a
what do we call
demanding
it?
restorative, dynamic restorative.
Something that I've never experienced.
Somebody said, don't believe him when you go and retreat with him that you do restorative in the evening. You do dynamic restorative. But I used to call it It's a warm down. Because
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people
I like
use,
that.
a lot of time I used to be near a beach, and people would be on their bikes and they'd be on their scooters and they'd be going to the beach and be
Mhm.
swimming, and
Mm-hmm.
they just wanted to come and go, and after that. That's the wrong thing to do. You've got to actually keep moving, be a little more dynamic for the first 40 minutes, an hour, then go,
Nice.
and the last 20 minutes go, and then Shavasana restores you as well.
Beautiful. So just to wrap up, I've got 3 quick fire questions
Okay,
because
go.
this is the first episode I've recorded
Have
for
the
this
multiple
new
choice?
No, there's no right or wrong answer. So the first question is a scripture or text that inspires your practice. I know you probably have a lot, but
Purana, Bhagavad Purana, recently.
great. 3 words to describe your sadhana.
Regular, discipline, sometimes I think it's a bit boring. I'm not just my morning sadhana, not my my whole. Well, that's really bad. Regular, because I tried to keep regular with all my practices. Disciplined, because I tried to. On the front of my mat, I've got discipline. So in the corner of my mat, in a felt tip pen, it just says discipline, because that's yoga. So I've got to have the discipline to actually get on the mat to do it, and that sets me for the rest of my sadhana for the rest of the day. But boring and tedious in the sense that some things have to be boring. Have you ever noticed that? Some things have to be repetitive. Like everything doesn't have to be exciting all the time. Did you ever do, before computers, you had to do mail outs, and the only way you could get your business advertised and publicised was you went to a table and you printed out 1,500 flyers, and then you got 1,500 envelopes and 1,500 stamps, and you just have to fold them up and put them in the envelope and send them, but write the address on them. That was the only way your business would work. Now that's really boring and really tedious, but it works. For that time in life, that's how businesses became successful, because you got a letter through the door from my company. You go, oh look, Stewie Enterprises is selling this. Let's buy one of them, or let's go to his shop. And like that's what I mean by boring and tedious isn't the right word, but not exciting, not like you have a lot of eureka moments. So the eureka moments disappear as you get older. You know, in yoga, you have eureka moments. Definitely in the first few years, you go, oh, wow, this is amazing. And you've got this aura and this energy. So discipline, regular. I don't know the other word. I don't know how to explain it in English.
But you summed it up
Yeah.
with the analogy.
Yeah.
That was great. And then finally, summarize this conversation in 1 sentence.
Heartening.
Great,
for the heart.
thank you,
Good for the heart.
Stu.
Thanks, Bobby. No, thank you.
Awesome.
Lots of
So
love. Thanks,
nice to
Bobby.
just. I feel I get extra lucky to get to have a little extra time with you. So
Oh,
I
that's
feel
so
like also
Bobby.
with the London crew, they're a bit selfish. They are practicing all the time, and
Yeah.
for us that
Yeah.
are coming from
I get
away.
you in a little pixel screen that size. on
Yeah,
the
the
wall.
Zoom.
Yeah. No, my pleasure to sit and talk to you, Bobby. And I don't get out very often, so it's good for me.
And here we got to check out the sound studio in Old
Yeah, we're in there.
Rishikesh.
We're leveling up, and we've moved up into Deepak's studio in
Yes.
deepest Rishikesh,
Thank you, Deepak.
away from the tourists.